right, hello there. This recording is to show some results of some research that we've done on why a lot of AI projects are failing. And it's a lot of like tips and process and thinking around how do you make sure they're successful. So there's a bunch of slides here. I'm going to try a different format. I'm doing kind of like a slideshow presentation today, but I will kind of have a pen and kind of drawing over it. So I got my screen over here, so I'm going to be looking at the screen while I'm talking. All right, so, and apologize for these little white transitions. I'll work on something better for next time, but yeah, anyway, not that important. So, in terms of where we're at the time of this recording, so I think, I'm not the only person to be thinking this. There's lots of other thought leaders out there who've been saying we're kind of at this post hype cycle lull right now, the Trough of Disillusionment, if you want to call it that. So right now, people are becoming a bit disillusioned, or they're wondering why, there was all this great promise of AI and why is it not delivering, or, the reality is not matching the hype. You might see a video of someone putting together something amazing in a slide deck from just a prompt, and then you try it and you don't get the same results. And it's like, why is it not working for me? So but the good news is that the end point is higher than the lower point. We just have to get past the peak of expectation management or understanding what it's really going to take to make these systems be successful. So here's kind of a list of different reasons why these projects are failing. Sometimes it's a lack of understanding of what the AI limitations or capabilities are. There can be a lack of process or logical frameworks for the AI to be using. I'm going to go a lot more into that. We might be giving the AI too much agency. We're trying to make it do too many things and makes its own decisions without giving it clear guardrails and a smaller scope to be working within. There can be issues with a lack of data or quality data issues in your data itself that the AI is using, or maybe you have gone as far as to build what are called like these RAG systems for your AI, but then you're having problems getting the right answers from them. So, problems with data quality. There can also be a lack of testing. We are seeing so many systems out there that are published live, no testing done on the AI, and then the AI invariably will start making mistakes, or even worse, start promising things or saying things it shouldn't. Companies get very upset. They get really scared. They take it down. But really, the problem was in some cases, there was just no or inadequate testing that was done. And AI testing is different than software testing. It has some nuances, which I will also go into in this video. The other the other thing that is causing failure, sometimes there's just a lack of strategy around it. And I put ROI in there because, what is it you're trying to do with the AI? It's one thing to be doing an experiment. It's another to be looking for a clear ROI. If you can really specify, an ROI can be time or money, doesn't have to be money. If you have a very clear objective for what you're trying to achieve with the AI system, and you know exactly how long it is taking people to do that job right now, a job that maybe they don't want to be doing anymore because AI can do it for them, you can quantify that. So being able to quantify it as something very specific is going to make it much easier to get a measurable outcome. Another slide, so other reasons for failure. Another one is that some people are using tools to drive their innovation. What I mean by that is you shop around, you find a tool, like a very popular one would be, let's say, a call recording with AI and it creates transcripts. And they're awesome. And there's, I think, like at least a dozen out there right now, if not even more. And experimenting with tools is great for many reasons. It tells you what's possible. It gives you ideas. Sometimes it can lead into some adoption, some quick wins. I'm not saying you shouldn't do that, but if the only thing that your business is doing, and especially true for mid-sized to larger companies, if you're just using tools to drive the innovation in AI, you're skipping all these other things I'm going to talk about, which is process and being able to quantify benefits and things like that. And you're going to be hitting limitations of it. The tool is going to assume certain processes; those might not line up. There's all kinds of things that can go wrong if you're just using tools and you're skipping all of the bedrock work that needs to be done as well. Another issue is that sometimes people are using AI where they shouldn't be. So AI is really good at filling in this gap that existed before, which is the gap of doing qualifications on data that is not deterministic, but is dependent upon the um, it's qualitative, so it's subjective. And so when the AI is having a qualitative or subjective decision, that's perfect. When you don't want the AI to be making deterministic decisions, like is the answer to 1 + 1 = 2? There's no reason to ask AI that. That is just a pure deterministic question. You know the answer is always 2. It's never maybe it's 2, maybe it's not. So sometimes you have failure there. Another is that the systems that you need to be building on aren't validated. That that could be like security or infrastructure. Of course, budget timeline misalignments. Maybe there's not enough time spent on change management. How are you going to adopt and integrate these things into the business? There's also consideration about top-down and bottom-up incentives. I'll go into that a little bit more. And then the last one, so if you're doing a lot of tools, you are experimenting, but sometimes there's not enough experimentation taking place. All right, so in order to build the framework, first step that I recommend, is to document your pain points and your aspirations, so your problems and opportunities that you're seeing. And then it's good to be thinking about them not only as top down, but also bottom up initiatives. Top down, is going to be things like we want to make more money, we want to spend less money, right? Top and bottom line. But initiatives that are coming from the bottom up of your team, those are going to have different incentives. They'll be related, but it's going to be people who maybe want to spend less time doing the things they don't want to be doing and more time doing the things they want to be doing, right? So they want to be enabled, empowered. Mapping these different initiatives across the matrix is where I suggest starting. And then once you have these things mapped out, look at things that are especially in your effort that are high up. And could you break those down into smaller initiatives that themselves generate value, that you can quantify the ROI? Because if you can, then you can be building these blocks up towards a larger project, and you don't have a larger benefit with an emergent value, and you don't have to be getting all the way to the end right away. So if you can break your projects also down into smaller wins, that is also highly recommended if you're trying to get that, if you're trying to make sure that each of these projects is successful and has a return. So this is what I was explaining about the top-down, bottom-up incentives. So, you can think of it as creating more headroom and more legroom for different people, depending. Where is my drawing tools? There we go. So, oh, and I wanted to actually go to the other slide first. No, go back to present. Present. There we go. All right. Can I go back? Yes. And pen mode. All right. See if it listens to me this time. And I guess we'll draw in red. Okay, so the top. So what we're really trying to do here, if you're trying to work on the top of the line and the bottom of the line in your top down, so you're trying to increase, your revenue, and here you're trying to reduce your costs, right? Your expenditures, and the pen doesn't want to write anymore. There we go. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to increase this gap between the top and the bottom. Wow, the pen really just starts and stops working all the time. I don't think I'm going to be able to use this for the recording. All right. Pen is no-go. Pen is definitely no-go. And I am just going to click through. What I was going to say there is just you're increasing the gap between the two. In terms of the right, for the bottom up, for the people in your team, they want to do more of what they love and do less of what they don't. So you're increasing that size. Let me get this on camera. Increasing the size there, going up and down. And here for this mapping, so I'll try one more time with the pen, see if it wants to oblige. But here, if you're mapping, if on the left is low effort, high impact, so you want to be focusing first on this quadrant. And what I try and do is I'll put indicators of where certain ideas sit here. Sometimes I will draw a line if I'm not sure if the effort of something is somewhere between low and high effort, but I know it's high impact. And so that can kind of give you an idea of where things are sitting on that matrix. And let's turn off pen mode. There we go. That worked that time. Great. We'll hope it works again the next time. So the next three layers or the three layers to think about with your projects is going to be data process AI. You could think of it as either data process AI or process AI data. Lately, I'm actually starting to think of it as being data is actually the underlying bedrock because process in the end, or even AI, these automations, they all can be thought of as data. Everything is data. So if you start thinking about your entire business and the people inside of it, we're all just data. We're all just information. It's the knowledge about if I'm the business owner, it's where's the business going? What are my goals? What are my own personal strengths, weaknesses? What are the strengths and weaknesses of the team? So people also have information about them that ultimately can be captured. But if you're thinking about a specific project, it's the data related to that project. So if we're doing a project where we're capturing the knowledge of, let's say, some technical engineers, because we want to be doing engineering solutions that can be either generated or talk to this system to help engineers know about the collective information and knowledge of the whole business of all the engineers that have ever worked there before. That's all data. So understanding what data is needed and how you're going to obtain that data and starting to collect data now is really important. And by now, I mean, if you're not collecting a lot of data or if there's areas you could be collecting data, just start collecting the data. The next part is process. If you have very clear process, and process is both, you can think of it as a flow chart, you can think of it as a sequence, but you can also think of a process as a decision tree. So let's say I want to create a system that helps me with deciding if diagnostics or determining if I should be doing an ad campaign for a client. I don't know, you can think of anything as a human, we might have certain criteria that we're looking for. And if a client is meeting that criteria, let's say if it's for an ad campaign, you might check, is there enough demand for this? Is the cost for the search low enough? What's the competition like? You're pulling all this information together. And then from that, if you can quantify your thinking process down into a set of rules, maybe a scoring system or something, you have a process there. So anything that you can turn into a very clear systematized process, whether that's, for automation, that would be maybe a branching logic, or would be if the customer writes something upset by email or in chat, then have my AI system escalate it. If you can get your processes down really well, you're going to have a much better chance of success with automating or creating AI on any of these systems. So this is a big point of failure. And a lot of companies, and it doesn't matter how big you are, because I've seen in quite large organizations, process is still a problem. There are still things that are in people's heads. They might do work, they might do sales with handshakes, not with process. It's great, it works, but if we're trying to get the advantages of AI, we need to be thinking about process. So having said that, this little amoeba here that I'm drawing, this is me kind of how I'm thinking about data these days. So the thing that I've noticed is as we're collecting data everywhere, and at Fountain City, we're very obsessive right now about collecting data from everything that we're doing. I personally, I'm the owner of the business and I am just it's like hyper journaling. I have everything being documented in one place. And then my team so once you start doing that, once you start having your data all collected and you're becoming obsessive almost with it, it's interesting because all these services can then plug into the data. So for example, now that I'm collecting all of my data, I can synchronize that data and my team can now ask an AI things that I'm doing or that are going on with me, and it'll get answers back without me even having to tell them. And it can be really helpful because sometimes they're like, oh, you said that, I don't know, we should build a new blog page or a new service page about this topic. I know you mentioned it a little bit on the call, but here's a couple more questions I have about it. Or, are you meeting with this client next week? Or what projects are currently in the pipeline? All these kind of questions. They don't need to necessarily talk with me, the team, and they can get those answers back. And then that means when I am spending time with my team, we're talking about much deeper, more important things rather than just going into information sharing on things that they can just look up, right? So it's not about removing human connection. It's about clearing away the the noise so that when you are speaking with people, you can be asking questions like, how are things going? What opportunities are you seeing? Are there things that we should be talking through right now? A lot of, or just like Getting to Zero, if you're familiar with that term, it's a really good book. You can be having conversations that are more about that, which is just like really reinforcing the human connection. But other ideas that come out of it, sorry, I went into a tangent there, but other ideas that can come out of it. So now that I have all that data in one place, other things that we, for using us as an example, we can connect other services to it, like calendar, email, our CRM system. And because everything is just in one place, it can all be plugged in into that one kind of brain. And so I think you'll see this in your organization, that the more data you have, the easier it is to then build initiatives, and the more integration you can start building into the data. So think of this as kind of it's like your creative super domain, where as you do more and more things in this creative amoeba thing that's growing, it just bears fruit for you. You're kind of planting a garden and it just plants all these fruits. So data, really, really important. Sorry if my analogies are not quite working today. All right. So in terms of the implementation design itself, so first thing to think about is that you've got two kinds of AI. Oops, get my fingers on the screen. Two kinds of AI automations. So you've got, or two AI types, sorry. One of them is automations and the other is an assistant. An automation is something that just kind of runs itself. I think my next slide goes into that. And it has certain automation steps, and it might have branches like it shows here on the right of the screen here. But the other type is more of an assistant. An assistant would be more, you are interacting with the AI and the AI is giving you information back. And that's going to have different architecture, different kind of use case. So flowcharts, right? They are super important. I have here like an example of a flowchart here, but the flowcharts essentially are your blueprints to how you're going to be creating it in an automation. So really important to have those in place. The next thing is the deterministic versus qualitative. So I already talked about that a little bit. So we want to make sure that you're not using AI where you should be instead just using math, for example, or a normal search. And then the other thing is you do want to break down your AI decisions into smaller steps. I will go into that as well on another slide here. The other is prototyping. So that is something, depending on the size of your project and the size of your company, prototyping might actually just be the product, but it can be, if you're trying to do something really big, you can also do prototypes today easier than ever. There's almost no excuse to be doing that you can't be doing prototyping. The only excuse you might have that is legitimate is if your company had enterprise level security and policies and you had lots of restrictions, then you might be limited in how you can prototype. But otherwise, prototyping is a really great way to see if there's benefit, to get feedback from people before you implement something at a wider scale or in code, right? And then, of course, think about privacy, compliance, maintenance, and how you're going to be improving the system long term. All right, so uh, data itself is something that can also be overlooked. So data with an AI system, it uses something called vector database instead of a normal database. It's not, vector databases are not a replacement for traditional databases. They're just a different way of storing the information. When you store information in a vector database, which is how the AI brain works, you're clustering ideas around related topics. And these clusterings can actually be multi-dimensional, like there can be different aspects to it. For example, a cat and a dog are both animals, so they're clustered around a cluster of vectors that would say we're animals, but they're also pets. So they're also connected to a different collection set, which would be pets. If you can just think of it that way as like clusters of things that are related terms, you're on the right track for thinking about vector databases. But there needs to be some thought around when you are storing the data. So let's say you have a lot of data. how are you storing the data? You need to be thinking about not just how is it being related to each other, but how is it going to be used? For example, if you have the same data is going to be accessed by different people in your company, and you want the AI, the automation system, to be aware of how the data should be given, how the data should be used, depending on who is asking for the information, then you need to be storing the data with some piece of information that tells the vector database the role of the person and its relationship to the data. For example, if I say, how do I onboard a new client? That's me in the organization talking to my AI assistant that knows my company. The AI assistant needs to understand if I am a project manager asking that question, or if I'm a developer who has to start building some code things for this new person. Maybe I'm the admin office assistant. So depending on my role, the AI needs to give me a different answer, which means if I have knowledge documents, right, SOPs stored in this AI system, I need to categorize those SOPs by role. And then I need to pass to the AI system the role of the user as part of the retrieval. If you don't do that, if you just store your data in there, all your lovely 500 documents you have for your SOPs, and then you ask how I onboard a customer, it's just going to give you what it thinks is the document that talks the most about that, which may not be for your role. And all of a sudden, now your team it's frustrated because they have to say, "Oh, I am a developer. How do I onboard the customer?" And then because they're going to have to like say that over and over again to try and guide the AI towards the right document. So hopefully that's clear as understanding there. There's a lot more to this, but just if the only thing you want to think about here is just like data engineering, how is the data being stored in, can't be overlooked. It is an important aspect of it. The automation versus assistance. So this is just, I'm just visualizing this. So in the top here, this would be you're talking to an AI. The AI itself might have tools that you plug in. It might have knowledge that it's bringing back in. And these, so there, there could be knowledge. God, this is such a huge pen. I am so sorry. Knowledge over here. There could be tools that you're running. A tool could be something like, please clear all test data. It goes off. It knows where to clear the test data. It just does that action for you. A tool could also be, please schedule me an interview with this person. I've looked at their resume. They look great. Schedule me an interview with this candidate. So this is kind of like a human to AI kind of interface with a toolkit. It's going to have a different architecture than something's in automation. Here, we're going to have the AI has some kind of a step, a logical step that it's doing. It moves it along. It does another logical step, and it just keeps going from one AI to another. There's probably branching going on, but I just wanted to, keep it simple in the diagram. So knowing which of the two is important. Here I'm visualizing the idea of deterministic versus qualitative decisions. So something that is objectively true or false, don't use AI for that. So that would be, is the task overdue? It's either overdue or it's not, right? If you know the date, the task was due yesterday, there's no guessing if it's overdue. So you can have AI in this automation, but in this particular step of your automation, don't use AI, right? That's just a math question. Is the date further in the future than the due date? Yes, great, go down that path. But a different example, is the customer happy? You can't do math on that, right? I mean, maybe you can try and do some math on the how many words in the sentence were positive, happy words, but why would you do that when you have AI right now? So use AI to do subjective decisions, right? And then you can, if you're, and I wrote down here 80-20%, but in this particular question, you would want, of course, the AI to be accurate in its interpretation close to 100% of the time in terms of which of the two branches it's going into, right? So we want to achieve, but the thing is, you're not going to get 100%, but how close to 100% is acceptable? There are techniques and tricks to get it to be really close to 100%. But in the end, as soon as you're using AI, you're dealing with probabilities. You're not dealing with deterministic. Now, in the past, you wouldn't even be able to do this at all. A human would have to make this subjective decision. So it is revolutionary that you can now automate something that is subjective, but keep that in mind, right, when you're building these automations out. All right, so how do you achieve quality and how do you lower costs? So And by quality, I mean, how do you make sure it's not also making mistakes or hallucinating or whatever? So one thing as well, if you're seeing in your testing, oh, that is not draw mode. Here, back to draw mode. And let's try this. Maybe this is a smaller pen. If you have a big job, if you're saying, write a blog post and you tell the AI to do that, it's going to have to like write the entire thing in one go, and then it's going to spit out something and you're going to be, unhappy with the results. Not only that, but to get it to be better, you're going to have to use a more and more expensive model here, like, or even a reasoning model. Maybe you're paying like $1 for each run, right? That's not scalable. But if you take something like that and you split it into smaller steps and you say, first come up with a topic, then have this AI review the topic and make sure it fits our rules for what topics should be written. Then from this, write a first draft. Then have another AI here that takes this first draft and applies a tone of voice pass on it to make sure it sounds like you. Then have another AI over here that reviews this one to make sure that this actually did a good job and scores it. And if it's not a good job, it sends it back, right? So by breaking down a process into many sub steps, and this is one example with writing, but it could be also something with trying to determine the semantic intent of, let's say, a customer. Let's say you're getting an email into your inbox and AI is reading the email. The first thing you want to determine, for example, is this a support request, yes or no? Then if it's a yes, you can use a second AI to decide, is this support request urgent or is it a normal priority? By splitting it into two steps, you've greatly increased the likelihood of getting near, if not 100% accuracy across those two steps. If you combine the steps together, every time you combine steps, you increase the likelihood of a mistake. And then you also increase the likelihood that in order to get that step to work, you have to use a more powerful AI agent in that step. So splitting it up into many little tiny steps lets you use models that are a lot cheaper and increases accuracy. So, and if you're doing testing and you're seeing that your AI system is failing somewhere, one of the first things to think about is, can I split that up into multiple steps rather than increasing the model's power to get it to be correct? If the problem is really just the AI is making mistakes and blunders there. All right, next is the execution and validation. So testing strategy for AI, shameless plug, I do have another business called TestFox that does AI testing, but regardless of whether you're using TestFox or some other platform or doing it yourself, the thing to remember with testing is it is probability based. And so you're going to need a lot of testing. You're going to need it at volume. You need lots of permutations to try and trick the AI. You also need to make sure that it's staying within topic boundaries, not getting into legal trouble. There's also now these compliance things with EU AI Act. But all this said and done, you need to have a testing strategy for your AI. Then you need to have, of course, the adoption, training, and change management. The other thing to think about is human on and in the loop. I'm going into the next slide. And then for ROI validation, this is our model. It's been kind of the same even before AI, but you could even argue that right now things are going so fast, you might need to even have the ROI be quicker. But in general, anything that's 6 to 24 months ROI is generally to say a go. If you want to be a little more strict, you could say 6 to 12 months ROI. Anything that's over that cap, I would say either it needs to be broken down into smaller initiatives or just wait, right? That's a very slow ROI. Of course, there are exceptions to this. I'm trying to just give some general rules. Anything that's under 6 months, it's either a no-brainer, why are you even thinking about it, or there's something dubious about your math, because it's going to be really hard to get an ROI that's under 6. Like if your ROI shows it's going to be ROI in 1 or 2 months, either you're sitting on gold because that's going to be return on value day in, day out for the rest of your business's life or your life, or it's not as easy as you think it is, right? So just keep that in mind as well. And then, other things to think about is how are you going to monitor and continuously improve the system? So human in the loop, on the loop. So in the beginning, you're building trust. And you have to build trust with the AI system that is actually working the way you expect it to. So the first thing to do is to figure out where in the AI or automation system you're going to be putting people in there so that they can review the outputs and approve it. For example, if you want the AI to be writing emails, the first thing you might do is have a human in the loop to validate that the emails are good, press a send, and then after it's been doing it enough times through, then you shift over to human on the loop, so to speak. So then the person is monitoring the operation of the AI, but we no longer have a human there as a stopgate to approve or reject the automation step, right? So we're ultimately building towards that in all of these different systems. Once you start going into that monitoring, and of course this is also during the human in the loop as well as on the loop, you shouldn't be doing this only later, but I have it here shown as later. When you're on that loop here, you're looking not just at how it's doing, but you're monitoring the error log, and you're also helping to improve the system further. I have here self-reflection. This would be you're using the AI as it sees problems with its own results, reflecting on its own work how it could be better. And you can take that input, and at first you might have a human in the loop deciding how to apply that. And eventually, even that process of self-reflection could be human on the loop, not just in it, meaning the AI system is self-reflecting and self-improving its own work. And you're just on the loop, making sure that you agree that it's making those improvements in the right direction. It's not going down a rabbit hole. All right, so I think we're approaching the end here. So, what is the key? Let's just recap. What are the key success principles? There are, I talked about many different things, but if we were to just refine it down, it would be make sure you've got process, big exclamation mark there. If you've got process, it's going to be way more successful. Make sure you have data and you know how to, we didn't go into how to create the data. That's a whole other presentation on all the different approaches because you can synthesize, you can interview, you can scrape data from places that people forget they even have data. There's a lot of things you can do to create data. You can also just be doing capture as you go. Then overall, I didn't go into this very directly, but remember that AI is an asymmetric bet. So when you get it right, it delivers nonstop for the rest of the life of your business. So even though I will say, even though the industry is having high fail rates right now with AI projects, and and you can see when, and this whole presentation is talking about when are they successful. So what do you need to be doing to make them to be in that 20%? But even if you're failing, and these companies still are trying because the upside is just huge and has an unlimited long-term return. So if you can save 5 hours of your week, that's a permanent saving, right? And with that time, you can be doing more interesting and exciting things. So it's worth it, I would say. The next is so focusing on your clear and compounding wins. So breaking it down into smaller chunks, get your win, build on to the next thing. Having those clear decision trees, and then, building towards the larger initiative by compounding those wins is kind of the same thing there. Anyway, so that is it. That's actually my last slide. So thank you so much for watching this video. If you guys are interested in getting more details, I could do a follow-on video with some case studies and examples, but this was already quite long. So anything else you want me to go into deeper, let me know. I'm happy to do it. Thank you.